No one does that intricate of an exam, and no one does it in that order. No one looks to the brainstem and the neck first as the original root cause of a weak core.
Welcome to the Experience Miracles podcast, where we help parents find hope, answers, and drug-free help to overcome your child's chronic health challenges. I'm your host, Dr. Tony Ebel, and I'll be sharing my experiences as both a dad and a doctor on every episode. I can take the latest science and neurology of healing and break it down in the most simple and relatable way possible. We'll take on the toughest topics and answer your biggest questions through interviews with other amazing parents and leading experts, leaving you with practical action steps that you can take to help your child heal and thrive. It's time to expect and experience miracles. Let's get started.
All right, Experience Miracles podcast parents, say that 10 times real fast on a podcast that's being recorded. I don't think I can. So let's get into it. This episode today, you got me going deep, going into the neuroscience of low muscle tone. We're talking about low muscle tone. We'll talk a lot about how it relates to autism, sensory, ADHD, even seizures, epilepsy, anxiety, those sort of things. We'll talk about weak core. We'll talk about what's going on that's really causing it. But we're also going to talk about what if you've been doing months or years of PT, OT, speech therapy? What if you put a whole sensory movement-based gym into your basement to try and help your kiddo with low muscle tone, weak core, and these gross motor, fine motor, multiple motor delays and dysfunctions? As always, with our podcast, we're going to get right into the real thick of the challenge, and we're going to get right into the real thick of the neurology and the science. But we're not going to go one or two sort of surface layers deep. We're going to go beneath the surface and really, really teach you what's the actual root cause of low muscle tone. Is it really just weak muscles, or is there something more going on? So like pretty much every single episode and every single conversation, question, and episode we will go through here, we're tapping into that deep parent gut instinct, that kind of inner questioning you probably have had for quite some time. Maybe for some of you, it's a quiet voice. Maybe for others, it's a loud voice. But it says, I think something else is going on. I think something else is up. We should be seeing more response. We should be seeing more results, or at least quicker, better, more long-lasting results with all these therapies and all these things we're doing to address low muscle tone and our child's challenges with autism, sensory, and ADHD. So if you've ever had that deep gut instinct that says, man, here comes another therapy appointment, which, by the way, holy son of a gun, do we love PT, OT, and speech? And please share this episode with your rock star pediatric PT, OT, speech therapist, ABA therapist, whatever different kind of provider you have on your team. But especially if they're in the movement-based sciences and therapies, they're going to love this, because same as you as a parent go, man, I feel like I kind of knew this, what he's about to say, but I didn't really know, because we're going to go so deep into the research and so deep into the science. I promise you, they kind of sort of definitely know this too, but nobody has really taught it with such granularity or specificity and dug this deep, which is how God made me. When it comes to health challenges in kids, we do not just say, oh, it's bad luck, it's genetic, hopefully they grow out of it. We say what's really causing it and what can we really do about it, drug-free, natural, that doesn't treat it or cure it, but truly actually addresses the root cause and gets your child better. So if you've been struggling with low muscle tone, weak core, and gross motor tone incoordination sort of issues, and you've been plateaued, stuck, or maybe even regressing in therapy, regressing with their sensory, their behavior, their motor, their posture, their movement, their speech, man, this is a conversation for you. And now that I bring that word out, I'll tell you this too. If you're listening here today, very soon, not too long after this one comes out, I've already got the outline and the research done, which often can take me days, if not weeks. So I really can do a good job for you guys. But I've got another episode coming down the pipe really soon that's going to talk about regression. So specifically kiddos with autism where things were going along pretty smoothly, 12 months, 18, 24 months, and then speech, motor planning, social emotional, digestion, all sorts of things slid backwards. So the official term for that is regression. There's a full episode coming out about that. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you download, make sure even go to our website, pxdocs.com, and subscribe to our newsletter through there. Real easy box. All the articles, we'll link it in the show notes before, but just know that if you've gone through or having some of these challenges and they started with a regression, there is a full podcast coming about that too. Now, real quick, before I turn on my outline and really dig into my notes and really get into this episode, I got to give you a heads up. This conversation right here, talking about low muscle tone and weak core, it actually brings out one of my favorite combination dad meets nerdy chiropractor jokes. Okay. So if you've been listening to the podcast at all, you know that we talk about some real serious stuff, some real serious struggles with our kiddos, some real serious struggles that we go through as parents, looking for answers, looking for hope, answers, and help for our kiddos. And so if I didn't sneak in a couple of corny dad jokes, doctor jokes, I mean, come on, right? It'd be hard to just go all the way into neuroscience only. So because this one has a conversation about root cause stuff, so core foundational issues, and we're talking about the weak core. I probably totally shot myself in the foot here, because now when I go to use the joke, it's like when somebody tells you like, oh, that movie is so amazing, and then you go watch, but they so oversold it. My joke may come across as mid when it shows up. Now, mid means pretty ordinary, I think mid maybe replaced meh, which was earlier, which is more of an emoji. But I don't know the details. I don't know the root cause trigger behind teen slang and terms, but I do know I should probably be done talking about those and get into the episode with low muscle tone, autism, and what's really going on. This thing right here is one of the most common challenges we see in practice every single day, because we are taking care of kiddos struggling with autism, ADHD, sensory, anxiety, seizures, depression, pandas, speech delays, and you name it, it's almost all related to low muscle tone. Like nearly every other single health challenge these kids face, this one never comes alone per se, but instead low muscle tone, weak core, gross motor delays, missed motor milestones, they're almost always accompanied by things like challenges with social engagement, behavioral and emotional dysregulation, speech delays, gut issues, you name it. It's also important to know that low muscle tone and motor challenges are not just an issue for younger kids going through those initial stages of motor development, but it's actually a major problem we see with our grade school, teenager, and even young adult patients that people just give up on and they're no longer addressing. Low muscle tone is a major problem and an indicator of way more dysfunction and dysregulation going on within the brain and the nervous system, because its root cause goes many layers deeper than what you've been told is going on, just weak muscles. Weak muscles and a weak core are obviously a part of the problem and where the term or diagnosis comes from, but in reality, there is so much more going on. And when you get done with this episode all the way through, you'll see that low muscle tone, weak core, and your child's gross motor delays are actually more of a symptom of deeper neurological dysfunction and dysregulation. And that until that is addressed, it's likely your child will still struggle with low muscle tone, weak core, movement, coordination issues, and all the brain-based stuff connected to them. Now, this dude right here, Joseph, he presented to our clinic as a perfect storm neurological intensive care program patient. So this is where out-of-state patients come for 2 weeks of care, and his amazing family traveled from out of state. So Joseph's presenting challenges were autism, sensory, seizure disorder, constipation, bowel blockage, acid reflux, sleep irregularities, anxiety disorder, poor diet, dyspraxia, and low muscle tone. And isn't it interesting that as I read that word for word from his intake paperwork, his mother, Amy, puts low muscle tone last on her list of concerns, because it truly was. He struggled so badly sitting up straight and moving his body appropriately and had seen no progress after years of PT and OT that mom actually just stopped doing therapy altogether and pretty much had given up thinking that that part of his life was ever going to get better. You should have seen Joseph when we met him, just bent over, stuck, unable to move at all, basically. Now, all those other conditions and challenges mentioned first actually perfectly illustrate the whole neuroscience story we need to teach everyone here on this episode. Because the truth is, low muscle tone and the real root cause behind it are actually the same, or at least very neurologically similar to what causes autism, sensory processing disorder, seizures, his gut issues, his immune challenges, and so much more. Or probably better stated, they are all simply related symptoms or conditions. And while some may look at low muscle tone as a cause of these challenges, the truth is it's just another layer of the dysfunction, and it's not the deepest core root cause. There's something underneath of it. So here's what's cool about Joseph's story of struggling with autism, seizures, dyspraxia, and deep gut and immune challenges. Within a matter of a few days and a few adjustments, his core almost immediately activated and start to come back online again. And this led him to craving movement. On just the third day of the intensive program, he surprised his mom by telling her he wanted to go down to the hotel gym, get in the pool, get in the gym, and do a workout. She couldn't believe her ears. And that's exactly what he did. His neurologically focused chiropractic adjustments were working so well, it actually stimulated and triggered his brain and body to automatically know what it needed most: movement. I could go on, but honestly, let's get into it. Let's cover in detail what the real science behind this, and then we'll make our way to my favorite part. What do you do about it? How do you help your kiddo? When it comes to low muscle tone, autism, motor delays, speech delays, dysfunction, the truth is these kids and families face multiple layered, not just straightforward challenges with weak muscles. There's multifaceted issues and real life struggles that we're going to tackle head on that go beyond the movement, coordination, walking, running, stair climbing, daily struggles. Those are big deals, but so is this. Number one, feeling plateaued, feeling stuck, seeing slower than you'd like progress in PT, OT, and speech therapy. And number two, concern and worry and understanding that low muscle tone, incoordination, and motor delays actually lead to brain-based challenges like autism, ADHD, sensory, learning difficulties, behavior issues, emotional dysregulation, epilepsy, you name it. We'll break down not just the neuroscience behind weak core and low muscle tone in the first place, but we'll also link that to those other conditions and talk about why your child may be plateaued or stuck despite months of therapy or years of therapy. Parents, you probably already deep down feel like there has to be this missing link and something more going on with their nervous system, something more than just weak muscles and a weak core. And if you've ever had that thought or ever had that question, you're absolutely spot on. And we're going to break it down and give you the full set of answers and explanations as to what really is going on. And then remember, stick with me all the way through to the end of every episode so I can give you the action steps, so I can give you the next step to take, the plan of attack. Because information is fantastic. Information and knowledge is not where the power to change your child's family and your child's life comes from. It is the implementation and the action. So this is an information empowerment. I don't really consider it an educational podcast. I consider it an empowerment podcast with a lot of science and a lot of research and a lot of education. But I really don't consider it that either. I consider it an action podcast. So the classic signs of low muscle tone are the ones you can see. Poor posture, rounded shoulders, head tilted forward, tilted to the side, slump sitting position. We're going to link in the show notes an Instagram reel that we did telling Joseph's story. Guys, this is a podcast, so it's all verbal, so there's no visual. If there's ever a podcast, you go to the show notes and you click on one of the links, go to the link to Joseph's reel. Go watch his story. You'll see him slouched, slumped over as this tall 5'3", 11-year-old who literally, when I say he couldn't sit up, he could not sit up. So you got to go see the pre and post differences because, you know, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. I think in that case, that video is worth 1,000,000 words to really show what we're talking about and how much this one catalyst getting into the nervous system with neurologically focused chiropractic care, because Joseph had done all the movement-based therapies, all the digestion and diet changes and detoxes, and he was on a bunch of medications as well. And so his motor challenges, you know, we've been blessed to take care of thousands of kiddos, but I just feel like literally the visuality, which again, I like to make up at least one word per podcast episode. I think I just hit my mark right there. The visuals of Joseph's story are just so apparent. So go to the show notes, click that. The other thing, difficulty maintaining upright head control. They're just constantly kind of bobbing. We like to talk about low muscle tone, weak core. We'll kind of often nickname them from a motor standpoint. These are our drunken bull kiddos. They struggle with posture, movement, coordination. They're just delayed. Their movement processing. This is a big part to talk about because when we start to get kids better, this is one of the first changes you see. When they go to make a decision, when they're given, say, maybe an instruction at physical therapy or sports or even in school, like, hey, move on over here or move in this way. Or even in our office, we see this. It's one of our tests. But when they're first getting adjusted and we say, okay, go ahead and lay down, turn around, move around the office, move around the table. If there's a real big delay between them thinking, so the brain activation and trying to send that signal to the muscles, which then need to activate and coordinate and stimulate and make the movement happen. When there is what we're going to talk about in detail in this one, something called subluxation and nervous system interference, you will see a time delay, an inefficiency, or a processing. So movement-based issues, low muscle tone, weak core, it's actually just a physical version of sensory processing delays and challenges, okay? And you can see it you can see it brewing with infants and little ones. So what medical doctors, pediatricians, they miss this stuff like you wouldn't believe. They miss torticollis. I mean, they miss the obvious stuff. So they're definitely going to miss the more subtle stuff, which is these gross motor delays and low muscle tone setting in. The other word with efficiency that I want to draw your attention to, because we're going to talk about it so you can spot it and say, okay, my kiddos are dealing with these things. They do not have efficiency and coordination and strength and stability within their posture. Another one is endurance. You know your child is struggling with low muscle tone. And then more importantly, now that we're in the thick of the episode, you're really going to now know that's a sign of nervous system dysfunction, dysregulation, and this thing called subluxation. If your child really struggles with endurance, a toddler, a child, all the way, honestly, to a teenager, right? And really, we could probably talk about just us humans, period. We are made to move. God designed us to stand tall, move often, be strong. A physically strong, active movement in efficiency and endurance is how we have a strong, active, organized, highly productive, and effective brain. So God's design is brilliant. I'm not even done talking about that. I have a whole literal section talking about literally how this thing is wired and designed, because we got to understand that to know how to get it back online. But endurance is a word. If your child fatigues quickly, you go to the park, you go to play, you're just at home and they're just tired. And what happens to what happens from or with a tired child of any age? Meltdowns, emotions, inability to follow directions. So right there, just through the symptoms, you can start to see how this is all wired together. And so a lot of times, those are the core components. And then if you look at it from a developmental chart, this is where the delays start to set in. They're not rolling over. They're not sitting up. They're not crawling. They're not walking independently. They're not running. So they start to struggle with gross motor delays. Again, I'll do a whole deep dive episode. We're really doing it here, but we'll do another one all about gross motor delays and then fine motor skills. You know your child is struggling with low tone, subluxation, and nervous system dysfunction if they're delayed in struggling with fine motor. And you go, well, but isn't that different? Those are different muscles. Yes, but development must happen in a specific sequence. So if they don't make it to first base, gross motor development with tone, appropriate tone, coordination, efficiency, and endurance, those are kind of our 4 words of the day, then they'll be delayed getting to first base, which is gross motor development and those skills. So then they're going to be delayed and struggle with getting to the second, third, more advanced functions like holding utensils, writing, buttoning up their clothes, doing different sports that require hand-eye coordination. Kiddos that struggle with low muscle tone and subluxation and this nervous system dysregulation, they often end up really struggling in a bigger, grander scale in life because they don't get to engage. They'll start to kind of pull themselves out of not just sports and those things because they're a big struggle for them, but they just want to engage in social play and physical play and going to the park and getting engaged. And that is essential for pediatric development. Physical development, yes, but social emotional development as well. So this one thing, like everything we talk about with subluxation and the perfect storm, one thing begets a whole host of other things we don't want, which is the same way as saying, when we get this one thing working better, the nervous system, then we get the core, the tone working better, the motor system, gross motor working better, then we get fine motor, then we get the brain, bada bing, bada boom. Yes, I said that also on the podcast right now. I think that's the first time. Wow, 30-some episodes in. Maybe we could just set the AI, I know we don't really use AI, but if we could, to say, hey, every time Tony says bada bing, bada boom, maybe we just edit that out and not sound so corny and as old as I am. Moving on. The other thing that happens is poor oral motor control. So fine motor, just splicing it out a little bit. If your kiddo struggles with sensory aversions to certain foods and certain clothes, chewing, these are signs actually that the low muscle tone and the weak core, which again, I know I'm intentionally redundant, could have called this the Redundant Experience Miracles podcast. The truth is there's something underneath of that, but it's all linked together. So you'll just see inefficiencies, incoordination, and lack of endurance. So, all right, what is really going on? What's actually causing low motor tone and a weak core and weak muscles? Tight, tense, hypertonicity elsewhere in the body, specifically in the neurospinal system. All right, so this is the part of the episode where we're going to get anatomical, physiological, neurological, and we're going to go nerdy. But like always, God made me Iowa farm boy, neurological nerd guy. So we're going to put the two together. So I promise you we can make sense of this for you. So the real root cause of low motor tone, low muscle tone, weak core, and motor incoordination and delays is actually staring at pretty much every one of us in the face with our kiddos, because we're not looking in the right place. And that includes a lot of PTs and OTs and speech therapists. And as soon as I have taught this exact stuff to hundreds of them, and every time, like usually that's in person and I can see the responses. And when I get to this section right here, they go, you know, the old, actually, if you type in SMH on your phone, it's the emoji of the guy or gal smacking themselves in the face. Like, oh man, I knew that. How did I not know that? I've always known that. How have I not really known that? That's this. The truth is, hypotonicity, which is another nerd term for low muscle tone, you will not have weak hypotonic muscles anywhere in the body, most essentially, or most kind of for this conversation, pertinently to the core, unless you have spasticity or what's called hypertonicity and tension and increased excessive tone somewhere else. Now you can tell I'm slowing down my speech motor cadence to really drive the points home here, because I don't want you to miss this. Because what happens is this. Kiddos have a lot of, the vast majority of kids born in today's world are born with some sort of physical birth intervention. The most injurious, and that's a funny word to say, the ones that cause the most trouble in terms of the scale of birth, labor, delivery interventions, that I will tell you, when I see them in a case history, this is the essence of my work. This is the core of my work, pun intended again, there it is. The core of my work is what's called the perfect storm. And when we find these birth interventions, or I'm going to start going a little bit further back, even into in utero positioning, breech, and cord wrapped. When we see these things in the birth history, we know for sure we are going to deal with first, excessive, too much tone and tension in the nerves and the muscles of the neck. The brainstem, what's called the suboccipital area, the neck, the traps, and what's called the upper third of the torso, or the upper thoracics is that term. Now, here's the deal. Because low muscle tone and gross motor development, because every PT, every OT, every developmental pediatrician and so forth, they study, awesomely, rightfully, the sequence of development. When a child presents with brain-based challenges, they start their assessment going right for the core. They go right to find the deficiencies. They go right to find the weakness. And if instead, like a neurologically focused chiropractor who has studied the perfect storm and the connection to birth intervention, now let me say it as I really see it, birth trauma to the upper neck, the brainstem, and the nerves and muscles of the neck, the traps, and the upper thoracics and upper torso, that forceps, that's worse. Vacuum, that's bad. Cord wrapped, breech positioning, absolutely wreaks havoc on the neuromuscular tone, specifically of the cranium, the suboccipital, the upper cervical, the brainstem, the neck, the traps, that whole area that you would think about. I'm giving you the details of it, but you already can depict and think of what I'm saying. And nobody, not a pediatrician, and not even most pediatric PTs, OTs, or speech therapists, evaluate, examine, or even what is called the official way that we would test for this through the insight scans is the technology, and then by hand, pediatric chiropractors, really more so and better so than anybody else in the world. And that's not saying these other things aren't awesome. This is just the part of the episode where we need to provide contrast so that we can illuminate the missing link. The reason nobody has talked about this with you is because nobody's looking for it. And so we palpate, we use our hands, including our technology with the EMG scans I'm going to talk about next, and we can find this tension stuck in the neck first. So there is hypertonicity. There is excessive abnormal tone. The nerd term for this is what's called dyskinesis. And another nerd term that it alters and interferes with is what's called proprioception or mechanoreception. And so the way the brain, and specifically the cerebellum, which is in charge of motor tone and coordination, the way it decides what tone, what outputs, what activity to send back out to the muscles, because the nervous system is a two-way street, is it first listens to what's coming in, sensory input. And I know I've got you leaned in right here, right? I know I can picture you. Mom's out there hitting the treadmill out. Maybe you got the Peloton instructor quiet and you got me tuned up because you're like, oh man, this is the part where Tony gets nerdy and gets into it. I want to double tap on this. You cannot, and I want to say it both neurological, intricate detail, because that's my job. I'm not going to skip over the details because you need them, but then I'm going to simplify it every single time. You cannot have weak, low muscle tone, specifically in the core, which is the middle to lower third of the neurospinal system, our spine and our structure. You cannot have weak, low muscle tone unless you first have hypertonicity, excessive tight tension somewhere else. And the way God designed us is the cerebellum and the brain and the brainstem and the vagus nerve, which are all things. I know I'm on a podcast, so you can't see where my hands are, but if you're watching on YouTube, you can. They're up in the upper neck and the traps. Every single kiddo, tens of thousands of them now, that we have taken upon clinical intake, and we've done our exam and our evaluation, we find tension, hypertension, and excessive tension within the nerves and the muscles of their upper cervical and upper thoracics first. And this is a case of if you have too much tension somewhere, you don't have enough to go around, and you will have too little tone, too little muscle tone and strength somewhere else. And in this conversation, that somewhere else is almost always the core. So there's something always, literally every case I've ever seen, and I've seen tens of thousands of them, and I've done the deep dive case history to find the triggers, and I've done, most importantly for this podcast and this conversation, I've done the exam. The insight scans, which measure through thermal scan and EMG, we can actually find, track, and quantify this hypertonicity. And guess what? Our hands can find that too. That's what sets chiropractors apart, is we palpate and evaluate for disproportionate abnormal neuromuscular tone in not just the core and not just the big muscles, the legs and the arms, but we find it all the way down to the intricate detail with every single vertebrae and every single segment and region of that neurospinal system. No one does that intricate of an exam, and no one does it in that order. No one looks to the brainstem and the neck first as the original root cause of a weak core. They look at the weak core, they look at the weak muscles, and they say, hold this plank, do these exercises. And then you probably, when I said this whole time, I'm really deep here, and we're talking about hypertonicity and too much tone, you're like, oh, I know about that. My kiddo's constantly clenching their jaw. My kiddo is constantly, maybe older kiddos, unfortunately, Joseph did this, pretty much every kiddo that gets a little older does this, they crack their neck, they pop their own neck, they crack their own joints. You go hypertonicity, too much tone, spasm, that's my kiddo's hands. They're constantly clenching. They're constantly touching. That's my kiddo's feet. They're toe walking. That's my kiddo's legs. Our therapist, our PT. When my speech therapist does a deep dive evaluation of their tongue, there was too much tension on the tongue ties and the oral ties. So we clipped them, and we thought that was going to be everything, and everything was going to get better. And I'll do a whole episode about tongue ties too. Another one on the list I got to get done. And they go, oh, once that's gone, all the problems are going to be gone. But what we find all the time is post-tongue tie revision or oral tie revision, things get worse, not better, in a whole lot of other symptoms, because you're not actually addressing why that tension was there in the first place. And so I'm rounding third base with this episode, but I'm not even done with you yet, giving you the core root cause. Just wanted to use again. I've kind of like subtly dropped. I so grandiose mentioned the joke that now I'm subtly, but root cause, of a weak core and the root core foundational of development is the nervous system. See, it's not that good of a joke. Now that I say it again, I'm trying to make it better here because I just so pumped it up and it's just, that's not, I'm going to have to come back on another episode and get better at that. But truth is this, that foundational issue goes actually first deeper to the hypertonicity in the neck and in the traps. And this is a hard one because I'm visualizing this out. Usually I would draw this out on an iPad too. And you go to YouTube and you can see some videos I've done about this where we'll show you the scans that I'm talking about. And you'll see tons of tension in the neck and shoulders and then the weakness on Joseph's core. I've actually got a video where we literally go through some of these kiddo scans and you'll see hypertonicity in the neck and the shoulders and the traps, which then leads to weakness and low muscle tone in the core. So I've beat that drum. But there's something more. Why is there hypotonicity in the neck? That's birth trauma. That's breech position. That's cord wrapped. That's induction. That's vacuum extraction. That is forceps. And that is manual assistance. That is posterior presentation, sunny side up. That is any sort of physical tension, trauma, and stress on the neck, which even births that go wonderfully. I always like to make the joke, born in a tub, born in the water, at birth, at home, with a doula, with a midwife, with Bob Marley. Actually, I'll give them some credit. We've got Dr. Nathan and Dr. Stu, have been interviewed on this. Those two rock stars maybe are attending your birth, right? And they're docs, and they got midwives, you got doulas, you got Bob Marley playing, you got incense burning, and birth goes wonderful. It is not. Now, I always have to not only make my joke there, but I got to plead the fifth here because I'm a dude who was just trying to support emotionally my rock star wife through 4 natural births. But that process of baby's head and neck, making it through the birth canal and into the world, it's a heck of a physical journey to get out here. So what would be the most obvious, most likely, and I'll tell you, it's the single biggest missing link in all of healthcare. What is the most overlooked trigger of everything, including what we're talking about on this episode right here? Physical birth trauma and injury to the neck. And the more we ratchet up that intervention chart to emergency C-section, cord wrapped, vacuum extraction, many of times that's failed, and then C-section, forceps, collarbone broken, shoulder injuries, black and blue face, that kiddo is absolutely going to have hypertonicity and what's called subluxation and neurological dysfunction in the vertebrae, in the neurospinal region of the neck, the brainstem, and the upper thoracics. And then by nature of having that first, they're going to have low muscle tone and a weak core. So this putting it all together, rounding third base and bringing this episode home, that upper cervical region, that brainstem region, I want you to think of it like this: air traffic control. That is where the air traffic control tower for every function in the body. We've talked about the vagus nerve. We've done deep dives into vagus nerve and autism, and we connected that area, the brainstem and birth trauma and subluxation, to problems with the microbiome and the gut and the immune system. And we'll do more episodes about that because that is air traffic control for gut function. That is air traffic control for immune function and inflammation regulation. This episode, we need to get to teach you that area, the brainstem and the upper neck, is air traffic control for motor, tone, development, and coordination. And so when you physically injure the upper neck and the upper traps and you set in what's called subluxation, sympathetic dominance, you actually alter proprioceptive, mechanoreceptive. So those are terms of signaling and information input from the motor system into the brain. If it's getting too much in, it continues to put too much out, and that's the behavior issues. That's the sensory meltdowns. And for a lot of kiddos like Joseph, that's actually even the real root cause, kind of hidden in plain sight, as I always call it, of their seizures and their challenges there as well. So if we just hit you with a holy heck wow moment, and you thought we were just going to talk about weak muscles and different therapies and different exercises and KT tape that you could do to strengthen the core, those are awesome. I support them like crazy. I've got a daughter who didn't have birth trauma or anything else. My beautiful little girl, who's no longer little, Miss Elena, grew 6 inches in the last 10 months. So her body is just a little subluxated, more subluxated than usual. She's got a little bit extra tension in the neck and in the traps and a bit of a weak core. So she's going to our Rockstar PTs, and we're using a little bit of KT tape to support her for now. But I wouldn't do any of that physical-based therapy. We're working out with her. We're getting her running. We're doing stuff at home. I wouldn't expect any of that to stick, pun intended with the KT tape. That's actually a pretty good joke right there too. I wouldn't expect any of that to stick and get results if I wasn't adjusting her first and foundationally. This all goes together. And I work so hard. I hope you can hear it and make sense of it as we go along. None of this is actually an either or conversation. I'm not an or person. We're an and person. What we're saying is if your child has had low muscle tone, and then all the connected issues with the brain-based stuff with it, and you've been doing PT, you've been doing OT, you've been doing speech therapy, you've been doing ABA, you've been doing, developmental therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, maybe you're even going to see a functional neurologist, which is completely different, actually, than a pure principled nervous system focused chiropractor like in the PX Docs. And they're working on all these neurointegrative, wobble board, walk the line, close your eyes, touch this, do this, throw the ball. They're working on all that. And it isn't quite sinking back up and getting results. It's because that subluxation, that tension in the neck, the traps, and the upper cervical is, and again, not the only place that gets subluxated and not the only style of subluxation, but it's the one I'm focusing on here today. That will trigger all of these challenges. And so I've intentionally said kind of the same thing a bunch of times. And the truth is that subluxation is the one thing that you probably didn't know about at all until this episode and until this podcast. And having a conversation about, hey, tell me about subluxation, nervous system dysregulation, dysfunction, dysautonomia, the vagus nerve, birth trauma, cerebellum, prefrontal cortex, dig into proprioception, mechanoreception. You talk to a conventional pediatrician about that? They're not going to get it. And that ain't their fault. They have no training in it, no education. They often like to, people will say, is the chiropractor a real doctor? Well, real nervous system doctor. We know this stuff better than anybody else because we're trained on it. This is our education, is literally in neuromuscular function. And then pediatric chiropractors, our training really exists in neurodevelopmental function. And you got to know how it goes optimally to figure out what got it off track and derailed it. And then how to get it back on track is you go back in sequence and you say a weak core and low muscle tone isn't really the issue in these cases. Hypertonicity is first. If you don't make neurologically focused adjustments, so here we're bringing it home. So what do we do about it? What do you do about it? You got to find a chiropractor who knows this stuff, can find this stuff, because that's why nobody else is talking about it, because they're not looking for it. They didn't get trained on it. They don't understand it, so they're not going to look for it. Now, again, sneak this in. I send this to your PT, send this to your OT, send this to your speech therapist and movement-based therapists, ballers out there and rock stars out there. I hope you're hearing exactly what I'm saying and what I'm not saying with this episode. You couldn't be more accurately working on exactly what's going on. There's just one missing link that is the absolute specialty and just absolute core of what we do as neurologically focused chiropractors. And when we do that, it doesn't replace what you do. It absolutely, positively accentuates and accelerates what you do. And the benefits of speech and PT and OT will exponentially get better. So when we sent Joseph home, we found him another PT. We said, call your PT back. And yeah, I know you kind of gave up on it because he was plateaued and stuck. And y'all, you're like, dude, this guy's about an hour into the episode and he could have just said that. They got to get the subluxation and the tension out of the neck, out of the nervous system, out of the neurospinal system, and then the body will recalibrate, reorganize. And then, remember how we talked earlier about efficiency? Remember how we talked about endurance? Remember how we talked about posture and fluidity and coordination and tone? Guess what? All comes back online once subluxation is out of the way. Once you get rid of that excessive tension, the body recalibrates. It's incredible. Chiropractic is actually founded in tone. Nervous system tone dictates muscle tone. Nervous system tone dictates digestive tone. The gut is a muscle. And so everything links back to the nervous system, which is why we talk about it on every single podcast episode. But I'd be remiss to not throw in one more detail for you. What we've done differently with our protocols and what I've figured out, because these kiddos with hypertonicity in the neck and then a weak core and exhausted core, this is pretty much every one of my patients for 16 years running. So what we did is we took the various different chiropractic techniques that are out there, and we know which technique, which type of adjustment to deploy on which type of subluxation. Now, this is as granular and nerdy as I will get. I'm going to do a whole I told you, I'm going to do a whole podcast episode on kind of the innards and the details of different types of chiropractic and different techniques, and how you know that you have a real nervous system focused, or what we call neurotonal trained chiropractor. When you have hypertonicity, so we nickname that kind of the raging bull subluxation. It's full of tension. It's irritating. That's what's causing your colicky baby to be screaming. That's what's causing your child to have meltdowns and tantrums, your teenager to have anxiety. So that kind of subluxation exerts a sympathetic response, a fight or flight excessive response. You can't fight fire with fire. So traditional chiropractic techniques that are a bit more manual or physical. So I do not want you to do this, but if you already have, so if you have, understand it. If not, please don't. Don't go to TikTok and don't go to YouTube and look for most videos showing chiropractic adjustments. That is the literal antithesis of how we adjust kiddos, especially when they're wound up, sensory dominant, and have tension. Actually, and we do have a few of them online. If you watch us adjust, you would be like, that's it? That's all you did? Did you do anything? When you have excessive tension and tone, it's like a wound up guitar string, and you can't tone that. You can't tune that. You can't relax that by going at that. You have to just release it. So the first phase of neurological healing for kiddos with low muscle tone and autism and everything connected to it, we call it the release phase. We have to find where their subluxations and their sympathetic dominance are so pent up and wound up, and we make light, easy, what are called neurotonal adjustments to release that stuck tension and subluxation and sympathetic dominance. That's phase one. The second phase, and we'll close her down after this, I promise. The second phase is what we call reorganization. And reorganization often requires stimulation and activation of exhausted or weak, suppressed neuromuscular patterns. And so those areas on the core, again, if you love this stuff, if this episode is your family, I highly encourage you to go to YouTube, go to the show notes. We're going to put a link in there as well. Dr. Matt, my right-hand man, and myself, we both have videos where we actually go through scans. So you'll see Joseph's video, and there's actually a video of him pre and post adjustment, and you can see how his body literally responds physically and gets stronger and moves with more efficiency and more endurance. And then we'll show you the exams. We'll show you the EMG and the scans, which I'll send you into action with here at the end. But the second phase of adjustments, and this is where your chiropractor, if your kiddo has these challenges, you need a chiropractor who is trained in not a singular technique, but a multitude of techniques, because different techniques need to be more stimulatory and activating of that weak, exhausted core. So one form of adjustments gets rid of the tension. Another form of techniques and adjustments creates that reactivation and that parasympathetic response and gets the tone, wherever it's run out of gas, back filled up and recalibrated. And when you do one or the other, good things happen. Chiropractic techniques, singular, are awesome. What's different about a PX doctor and a really advanced, trained, neurologically focused pediatric chiropractor is we know how to deploy a multitude of techniques and know how to deploy them on different types of subluxation patterns. Now, I snuck that in overtime with this episode because it's essential to this conversation that parents, even you, need to know those details. You need to expect that of your pediatric chiropractor. And I also snuck it in because it's a little bit of a teaser and a preview of one of the upcoming episodes where I'll really teach you how to find a true nervous system focused pediatric chiropractor. And we'll get into the innards of what do they do with an exam that others don't? What kind of technology, the inside scans, do they do that others don't? What kind of techniques and clinical protocols and care plans do they use that others don't? And that does not mean, just like we're talking about PT, OT, and speech here, that doesn't mean other providers aren't incredible and wildly impactful. And it doesn't mean other kinds of chiropractic that focus more on musculoskeletal and back pain and neck pain and general wellness stuff doesn't mean they're not awesome for those cases. It does mean that for this stuff, you need to find the right exact kind of pediatric chiropractor, nervous system focused chiropractor who has the right training, the right technology, the right protocols, and the right techniques to get the job done. I'd be remiss. I know how detailed and I know how intricate and granular that is and that was, and we're going to do it. on every podcast episode because I just think this. Parents, you deserve it. And I promise you this, I'll always go detailed. I'll always go intricate, but I'll always make sure I put it in real simple, easy to understand and apply and take action upon analogies and metaphors. So speaking of action, the last couple of minutes of every podcast episode is actually way more important than the intros, the stats, the stories, and the science, because it's the next steps. And so number one, get excited. This is it. Don't get frustrated. I know that's easy for me to say. So often as parents, it's just our natural inclination. We're talking about natural wiring. I don't know why God made us this way, but we always feel so like, I should have known, right? The old should have word, well, that word stinks. It just buries us, right? Absolutely not at all, moms and dads on this podcast. Look forward, get stoked, get excited. You found the missing link. If your child has these issues and you put a flipping sensory gym in your basement and you're trying to like have them to hold a plank for 92 minutes, and they can, but they still struggle with things. This is the answer. Neurologically focused chiropractic. So get excited that you now have a deeper, more advanced understanding of what's going on. Go learn more. Second action step, go learn more. Go to the website, go to YouTube. However you love to learn, here's what God called us to get this information to you. I know that some of you love to read and have all the research citations. They're on the website. Literally, I think there's like 300 articles on there. The others like to watch videos where there's posters and visuals and images. What did I think I said it earlier, but I don't even know what word I made up earlier, but it had to do with visual something. Go to YouTube. We've got them. Go to Instagram. We've got them. Go to Facebook. We've got them. We've got a lot of our shorter videos on Instagram, and then the longer videos are on Facebook and YouTube, and you can find them there. And then number three, the moment that you go through this and go, that's what is missing. I know it. I need it. Go to the directory. So go to pxdocs.com, go to the show notes, go to the link in bio, and you'll find our directory. You plug in your city, your state, your zip code, your region, if it's international. And again, I went on a little bit of a tangent earlier on. If that directory spins out no one just yet, send us a DM on Instagram. We have doctors who are in the training pipeline, going through the certification. They have to earn their way onto the directory. They have to earn their way, all the intricate details and then some. They need to be able to deliver that for your family before we're going to send your family to them. So this is a real detailed out mission, okay? We're not going to send you to anybody. I grew up watching SNL with Chris Farley. We're not going to send you in a chiropractor. Again, I shouldn't do these mannerisms on a podcast, but living in a van, chiropractor down by the river, just a portable table, no shoes on, no exam, no training, just bam. No, we're not sending your kiddo to that chiropractor, okay? So go to the directory. If you don't find somebody, let us help you, okay? And we will do that. And I'm just going to close it again with listen to your gut, make that call, schedule that appointment. You can literally reach out to your PX doctor right there on the directory. You just fill out the form and away it goes, and then get your kiddo scanned. I introduced and mentioned the scans a lot on this episode, but the scans are very visual. And so to be able to really depict them on a podcast, hard to do. But I really, especially with low muscle tone, the EMG scan. So go to the website. I'll have our team link this one too. Check out the article about the Insight scans. And then you'll see right from there, you can click into a bunch of different videos that really show how this is done. But you've got to find more information. Yes, but you've got to get that exam. You've got to get that EMG scan and let your PX doctor go through this neuromotor tone evaluation where we look deeper, we look into the neck, we look into the brainstem, we look into birth trauma, and then we can measure it, we can quantify it, we can track it. And the coolest thing about those scans is we not only run them as baseline to know exactly how to give a personalized, customized care plan and adjusting technique approach to your child, we rerun those scans, we run those progress exams every 2, 4, 6 week increments to make sure we're making real, lasting, functional change. And that's what I'll really leave you with. Nerves that fire together, wire together. So when it goes offline, it gets worse. That's why kids regress. That's why kids continue to plateau, get stuck, or get worse. The opposite is true as well. When you get the right neurologically focused care and the right neurologically focused care plan, things get better over time. And there's an exponential improvement. And the coolest thing about, and this actually totally fits for speech, PT, and OT as well, because they're retraining the brain and the nervous system and the muscles, but they're working a lot of times with a stuck subluxated system. They're trying to retrain a system that has a massive roadblock and traffic jam into it because air traffic control is shut down. And so when we get that working again, all this retraining, this reorganization that you want to have happen to see short-term results, also, we're looking for long-term results. We want to get over these challenges for our kiddos for good. That's where chiropractic comes in. Chiropractic has such a lasting change into the nervous system because we work with something called neuroplasticity, which is just the nerd word for this neuro reorganizational pathway and healing mechanism through with which our care works. We do not treat and we do not cure low muscle tone, autism, ADHD, sensory, seizures, the list goes on. We address subluxation. We take care of nervous system dysfunction, interference, and dysregulation. And we do so at a deeper, more advanced, more intricate level and skill set than any other provider profession out there, which means when you do that first foundationally, and that's the core, one more time, talking about weak core, that's the core of your child's care plan. Guess what works better? Everything else forever forward. So parents, reboot that hope. Hope this episode did that. Maybe your hope was dwindling. Maybe you've been doing therapy forever and you're like, this weak core, this poor posture, like Amy with Joseph, you just gave up on it. He's always going to look like this and move like this. No way. Reboot that hope, restore that hope. That's what this podcast episode, this whole podcast and PX Tax platform is for. Then we gave you the answers. We broke it down. We got detail. We gave you that. And the action steps are yours to take from here. The additional one we'd love for you to take if you have not already is will you please subscribe? Make sure you follow. If you're on Apple, you hit the little plus and the little arrow. That way, not only follow it, but download it. I'm being picky, right? I'm Captain Granular here, Granular Greg. I just hit the plus and then hit the little thing. I think it's a little arrow and then download it. And then on Spotify, like if you have an Android or a Samsung, then you have subluxation in your life. You have dysfunction, dysregulation, and I don't know how you're moving forward. That's a bad joke too. I don't know Spotify and I don't know Androids and I don't know Samsungs, but I would love even you guys with your green dots on the group text, ruining every group text out there. Will you please go to Spotify or your favorite podcast episode player thingy guy and download, subscribe, and leave a review as well. We can reach millions of kids with this podcast and with this platform and millions of you, parents and moms and providers, and get your hope, get your understanding, get your clarity, get your action, moving in the direction you've been praying for, searching for, scrolling for. I love you. I am so blessed to have this job. I enjoy the heck out of it if you can't tell. So if there's anything we can do to help your family, you let us know. You reach out to us. Instagram, Facebook, those are the best ways to do it. And we'll talk to you and jam with you on the next one.